You can applaud if you're feeling it. See, that's proof that we have a live audience here at Town Hall tonight and that they're apparently feeling it. Thank you, everyone, joining us, whether you're joining us here in the building or virtually out on the internet. On behalf of Town Hall Seattle and our friends tonight at Third Place Books, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's live stream presentation of Ronit Plank and Alice Ikeda as part of our Arts and Culture series. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for joining us, wherever you are, in the building and on our new streaming platform, mytownhallseattle.org. I understand there was a little bit of drama this afternoon on the internet. Not our fault, but I hope it wasn't too much of a drag finding your way to us this night. Like everything at Town Hall, our new streaming platform is a work in progress, so don't hesitate to let us know about your experience at the address that you'll see in the chat below the screen tonight. The conversation this evening will run around 60 minutes, including the Q&A afterwards. You can pose your questions using the chat field at the bottom of the video player. You can submit it at any time. You can also text your questions to 206-504-2857 as noted in the chat. We can't guarantee we'll be able to get all of them, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. And for those of you who'd like to view the program using closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include podcast host Anna Sale talking with Angela Garbus on how to have difficult conversations, journalist Brad Stone, who continues his ongoing investigations inside Amazon, and the latest installment in our series of live concerts from Town Hall, co-produced with Earshot Jazz, continuing this weekend with the extraordinary trumpeter Thomas Marriott. And those events and a few others will begin to have live audiences as we get further and further into towards the end of the season. So keep your eyes peeled for opportunities, should they present themselves, to join us live. Though that'll be very clearly announced on the webpage when that's the case. You can check out more of what's upcoming by visiting that online calendar at townhallseattle.org. Town Hall's work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Arts and culture programs here in particular are supported by For Culture, Arts Fund, Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, the Norcliffe Foundation, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But finally, Town Hall is at heart a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. I said finally, but this time I mean finally. One final note. You'll want to dive deeper into tonight's conversation, I'm sure, and the best way is to purchase a copy of the book they're discussing. Please use the link in the chat below to buy through our partner bookseller, Third Place Books. All right. Whoop for Third Place. Ronit Plank is a writer, teacher, and podcaster whose work has been seen in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The Rumpus, The Iowa Review, American Literary Review, and many others. She's a host and producer of the award-winning podcast, And Then Everything Changed. It features interviews with survivors, authors, thought leaders, and people in recovery, sharing pivotal moments in their lives and decisions that have defined them. Her short story collection, Home is a Made-Up Place, will be published in 2022. Throughout her career, the producer Alice Ikeda has been in pursuit of stories that inspire courageous conversations. Her work has been seen on Emmy-nominated programs for networks including NHK Television Japan, RTP Portugal, CTV Canada, PBS, History Channel, A&E, Discovery Channel, plenty of others. She's currently a principal with Ikeda Vanderberg Productions, where her work focuses on interviews and stories with a social impact. Ronit Plank's new memoir, When She Comes Back, is the subject of their discussion this evening. Please join me in welcoming Alice Ikeda and Ronit Plank.
Well, Ronit, it's so great to see you here. I wanted to say congratulations because you have been working on this book since 2015.
Yes, I have. It's funny when you add up all the years.
Yeah,
It's been a long time.
So, you do all sorts of writing. You do fiction, nonfiction, you write articles. What made you decide, with all the breadth of work that you have, that your first book was going to be a memoir?
Well, I know this might sound a little canned, but I feel like it chose me. And I feel like someone asked me a while ago, when did you start writing this? And this also sounds canned in a way, but I feel like my whole life I was writing it because unbeknownst to me, I was taking note and observing things going on in my life in a way that I was able to then hopefully depict in the book. And those were just things I noticed. And so I think I was just logging maybe for survival. And I started by writing fiction. I was an actor first, and then I did short stories. And in the short stories, which will be out next year, these themes seem to keep coming up of losing power and being left and maybe emotional alienation. And so I realized, I have to work on this. I have to figure out what's going on. And I started writing essays and started publishing essays that were memoir essays, small excerpts, memories from growing up. And then when I was in grad school, my advisor, Deborah Gwartney, after I submitted a 20-page essay, because I wanted to write a book of essays, said, why don't you write the memoir already? And so that's when I dug in and I said, okay, I'll just do this already because I'm dancing around it.
Well, the memoir, people have asked me, what is this book about? And yes, it is a coming-of-age memoir, but I feel like there's so much to unpack in it. It's about relationships between mothers and daughters, what it's like to be a single father, loss of country when you immigrate, loss of family because of a cult. Mm-hmm. But through it all, it really is about searching for a sense of security that maybe you had when you were a little kid, but then you lost it. And so can you talk about your early years and how living on a kibbutz in Israel really shaped that sense of security that you sought for most of your life?
Yeah, that's a really important observation you made. And I think that it's funny when our parents tell us stories about our lives, and then I think when we get older or as we're growing, we may not be able to piece apart what were our memories and our associations and what were theirs. Because when I was growing up, I kept hearing, after we left the kibbutz in Israel, how amazing the kibbutz was. And back on the kibbutz, and when you were a kid on the kibbutz, and it was a mythical place almost. I had lots of pictures to look at, some of which I included in the book. And I had these stories and these sort of really good anecdotes to latch onto. But when I was digging in my memory, I realized it really did shape me being on the kibbutz, because you were taken care of by a community as a whole. You knew exactly where everyone was. The children all slept in the same house. We didn't even sleep with our parents in their homes. We saw them a couple hours a day. Our schedules were set. Our roles were set. We were absolutely children. We were absolutely the kids in the community with only the job of being children, with only the job of growing confident and exploring. And that's what made it idyllic, and that's why I became so confident. But again, I can't separate nature or nurture. I don't know if I would always have been like that or if my early years shaped me that way. But it was really a beautiful way to start life and made the contrast to the later years that much sharper.
Mm-hmm. So your parents had not the best childhoods. They didn't have really supportive families. And they chose to make a life in this kibbutz, which was really transforming for them as well. And yet they chose to leave. And when they chose to leave, did they think that their lives would change so drastically when they came back to the United States? Or did they think that there would be something better for them here after this experience at the kibbutz?
I think that my father wanted to pursue his graduate degree. I think the story that I have heard is that for years they went back and forth. Should we go back? Should we not? I think when you have a chance to be a citizen in one country or a citizen in another, that's a really beautiful position, and it must be luxurious to go back and forth and decide where do you want to be. You can go pick up your life that you left, or you can keep building this new one. And so I would say, from my understanding, it was a murky decision, and it seemed right at the time, but ultimately it wasn't the best for our family. But the family had already started to fall apart in its own way on the kibbutz, because the family didn't have to be a nuclear family ever on the kibbutz. There was a giant amount of people around to lean on. My mom would go off and do plays and perform sketch and improv at night. My dad would go read a book. They had very separate lives, and that just became more emphasized when they came to the States, and he was in grad school and he was working at the school, and my mom was home with us all the time. And whatever, as I write in the book, the cracks that had formed early in their marriage just started to get deeper and deeper until the family couldn't withstand it anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away from the book, but eventually your parents do split up, and you and your sister and your mom are left here in Seattle in pretty impoverished circumstances, and your dad is in New Jersey, and you're 6 years old at the time, and even at that time, even though your dad had left, you felt like your mom was slipping away from you as well. And can you talk about how maybe some things started creeping into her life that maybe started to take her away from you and your sister?
Yeah, so again, it's important for context, and this is something I really wanted to pay attention to when I wrote the book. My mom had been cradled by a community, so social, and just, she, like I said, everyone had their role. She's now in a city, cold, damp Seattle, without a partner, without any family, because her family was on the East Coast. Some friends, no money, no career, didn't even know how to write a check, 2 children around her all day long, who she didn't even have to raise on the kibbutz. And here's someone who, a lot of people know this story or can relate, married before she knew who she was. I mean, when you marry young, or even when you marry late, you may not really know who you are. And it's very hard to bring that kind of a self to a partnership and have it work unless you're going to dig deep and try. And I don't think either of my parents were ready for that. And I don't blame them, because who has not been in a relationship that has challenged them and been painful? But they definitely didn't have the skills or the resources to figure it out. And when she was alone, she just started to draw into herself more. She didn't feel well. She was exhausted, possibly depressed. She had no energy left for us. And I think that I, as an older child, did the best I could to lead and do what I needed to do to take care of myself. But I just perceived that there was less of her available. And then she started to listen to meditation tapes her friend had given her of a guru, Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh. I'm just laughing because Bhagwan has made his entrance. I can't get away from that guy. But so he made his entrance into our lives, and I started hearing cassette tapes through her door, her closed bedroom door. And really, some of the strongest memories I have of that time were gray days, Seattle, a voice coming out of a bedroom door, my mom not available, and not understanding why she was listening to this droning voice instead of being with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so, I mean, it's, the time period is really interesting where this is all happening, right? Mm-hmm. So your parents left for the kibbutz in the late 60s, you know, the American culture, you know, counterculture movement, peace, love, you know, looking for something different. And so it seemed almost appropriate that they left to try something new.
Yeah.
But then when they came back to the United States, it was a really different United States. Now you have all these kind of violent faith groups. You know, you've got Charles Manson, you've got Reverend Jim Jones, Children of God, and now you have the Bhagwan. Mm-hmm. Can you know, what do you remember of that time of your mom's vulnerability and kind of seeing her slip away to this guru who maybe is promising her some sort of enlightenment that she felt like she didn't have?
What I remember the most was this sense that whatever he was offering, whatever the books that were laying around, or the voice that I heard through her door, or the people whose parties we went to listen to his meditation tapes, because we would go, and that's in the book too, we would go to meditations with my mom, and I was 5.5, 6, and my sister was 4, 3.5, 4, and we'd sit, my mom had no babysitter, so we would sit there in these living rooms or on these lawns while these meditations and these gatherings would happen. And it's funny because now that you asked that, I realize we gathered like that on the kibbutz every afternoon to have tea and snacks with our parents and all the adults, and that was a really fun time. But I bet there was some connection happening like, wait, this is sort of familiar, but why are these people massaging each other? And why are they asking if I want a massage? And where's mom? And so that sense of not being looked out for, that sense of being sort of, you could just be, you're drifting. And, that sense a lot of parents give their kids that they're watching them and they have them in mind. I just feel like I started to almost internalize the lack of that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, your mom decides to follow the Bhagwan to Pune, India, where he had a huge group of followers, 6,000 followers. I'd love for you to read a passage from your book about the first time she left.
Oh, sure. I just happen to have that here. Is that funny? Okay. Prologue, Newark, 1978. When my mother told us she was going to visit Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh's ashram, I was 6 years old and my sister was 3. She was taking us to see our father for the first time since he'd left the year before, but I remember the promise she made. She would be back at the end of the summer to collect Nava and me and bring us home to Seattle. I had no idea at the time that she would be absent from my life for decades to come, or that my mother was committing herself to a cult. It was well past my bedtime when we landed at Newark Airport. I pressed my face to the window as the plane taxied and came to a stop, but could only make out a few small luggage trucks pulling up to meet us in the dark. "Come on, Ronit," she said, grabbing her purse and hoisting Nava into her arms. I glanced at the adults standing in the aisle behind me and followed my mother off the plane. The sticky June air hit me as soon as I stepped on the jetway, and though it was late, the terminal teemed with people. I kept my eyes on my mother, who walked ahead with Nava in her arms, searching for my father, her mouth tight, her face unreadable. I, too, searched for my father among the men near the gate, though I wasn't sure I remembered exactly what he looked like, and I wonder now if he felt the same. We hadn't seen each other since he'd come to our rental house after their divorce a year before to say goodbye. My mother slowed to a stop and put Nava down. My father stood just ahead, mustached and big-haired, wearing the same thick glasses he'd had for years, and a long-sleeved collared shirt. I leaned down and told my sister, "That's Daddy." I smiled at him like I might at a stranger, unsure if he would smile back, and suddenly, before I had time to see what his response would be, he picked me up and hugged me, swinging me around as he did. It was a change from the tentativeness between my mother and me. There had been less of her to hold on to for a while. I focused on the geometric patterns on his shirt, the pack of Winston lights in the pocket, his familiar smell. Before I was ready for him to let me go, he put me down and picked up my sister. My parents stood facing each other, together in a way they hadn't been in so long, but I didn't feel any surge of relief, saw no sign they loved each other again. So I smiled because I knew I should feel happy, though I didn't. I thought maybe my mother would feel better when she saw my father, but something was wrong. People in the airport moved in all directions. I heard unfamiliar languages and accents, smelled leather and perfume and hairspray. The excitement of travel pulsed and swelled all around us, but I homed in on the silence swirling between my parents directly above me. I had been sucked into their whirlpool once again, drawn to their center. My father tried to make eye contact with my mother, but she kept looking away. His jaw clenched. She adjusted her purse strap, flicked her hair away from her eyes. I didn't have the details, and at age 6 couldn't have truly understood even if I had, but I felt the dissonance. Two people who had given me life no longer wanted anything to do with each other. Yet there I was, a reminder of their connection and of their mistakes. Someone they had no choice but to take care of. My mother bent down toward me. "I have to catch my plane." I wasn't ready for her to go. I wanted someone to tell me again what was next, but instead she gave me a hug. I hugged her back, but didn't mean to be saying goodbye. She kissed Nava, still in my father's arms. I tried to catch my breath, but hiccuped air. If I had known then what was to come, would I have run after her and told her to stay? My father stood next to me, my sister in his arms. My mother walked away from us toward her gate, her frame shrinking in the bustling airport crowd, smaller and smaller, until I couldn't see her anymore.
When I read that, I felt like crying. I mean, I could really feel how you were feeling as a little girl losing her mom. But, now that you know what you know, had you run after her and begged her to stay, do you think she would have stayed?
No, I don't think so.
If you had asked her if she would take you and Nava with you, do you think she would have taken the two of you?
No, I don't think so. She did want to take us originally, but her friends cautioned her against taking us to India, And so she decided not to, but there was a chance we could have ended up on the ashram.
Well, so that, really leads me to the Bhagwan. Part of what he was saying to folks that were following him is to reach enlightenment. You couldn't be burdened with children. And so in the process of writing this book, I know you did a lot of research on the Rajneesh Puram. What did your research uncover about kids and families? Because that wasn't really readily available information at the time.
Yes. So, and it was a surprise to me as well. I had a sense of who Bhagwan was, but I didn't know who he was in the larger culture and what people knew about him. So children were seen as obstacles to enlightenment. And if you read first-person accounts, sterilization of women was encouraged. They didn't ever make people do this, but vasectomies and sterilizations were encouraged. People were also really encouraged to be with multiple partners, to do dynamic meditation, to even regress. So a woman I talked to recently whose father followed Rajneesh, she's the author Lily Dunn, and she was a guest on my podcast actually today. She went to the house, the Rajneesh house in the UK, and she saw she saw parents and adults with teddy bears, sucking on teddy bears, sitting in each other's laps, really regressed. So I think the whole thing about Rajneesh was that he was allowing children to embody adults. He was allowing adults to become young and give themselves what they needed or they never got when they were growing up. But that leaves children and families out of the picture with nobody home, physically and also just emotionally there to take care of them. So it was hard to read that those were Bhagwan's, that's what he extolled. And how did my mom not know that? Or did she know that and it didn't matter?
So, that brings me to the Netflix documentary series, Wild Wild Country, that came out a couple of years ago. It was wildly popular, wildly successful. And just a couple of weeks ago, Netflix released another documentary about his right-hand person, Anand Sheela.
Yes.
But in both of those documentaries, there's no mention of family or kids. You see all the historic footage about, you see thousands of followers, right? Because he had 7,000 followers, and yet you see no children. So what was it like for you to see these highly publicized, successful documentaries come out that was really adjacent to your story, but didn't cover a really critical part about the loss maybe families and children felt?
Yes, it was a very strange experience, one, to be watching something I knew so many other people were consuming that was about this phenomenon, this man, this guru, who had changed the trajectory of my life and my sister's life. I mean, I blamed him for so much growing up, although, as I come to realize in the book, it really wasn't Bhagwan that took my mother away. And I think to not see children addressed in the documentary, there were 6 of them, 6 of the episodes, and not once did any interviews take place with children who had lost parents or with people who had left children, or any footage even of children wandering on the grounds. And Wynne McCormick, who has written a lot, he heads the New Republic, and he wrote about this a lot at the time and even now. And there are documented reports from social workers saying kids were running around half clothed, not dressed for the weather. There were young girls with very older men, girls as young as 12 partnered with older men. There was, kids sleeping very separate from their parents. So it bothered me that there was no voice given to that experience. And so that's what I wrote about originally in my essay in The Atlantic.
I know that every storyteller has their point of view that they're trying to put out when they create a documentary or a film or write a book.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when the subject matter impacts so many people in this way, what do you think is the responsibility of a storyteller?
That's a great question, and I think that speaks a lot to the memoirist as well, because all stories matter, and your story and your recollections are going to be different from somebody else, even if they were in the same family. As we know, so many times siblings recall very differently the same events that happened. And because our perspective shifts all the time, I think that's why there should be so many voices. That's why I think you can examine a subject through lots of different lenses, and that's why I think it was really missed in this particular docuseries. Also, I have been contacted by several children of followers of Rajneesh who told me that they too felt this way about the docuseries, and people who have similar experiences that didn't relate to Bhagwan. This is a glaring loss or absence in that docuseries and in Ma Anand Sheela, because it's about the sensationalism. And I understand that in Wild Wild Country, we're looking at the townspeople in Antelope, Oregon, juxtaposed with Rajneesh Puram. I get that. But there's always room for kids. Sorry, I had to say that. There's always room to consider children. That's kind of how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm. How hard was it for you to watch that documentary, right? Because you have compared the Bhagwan and the cult as a natural disaster in your life. And so, you have friends all of a sudden calling you saying, we know you're writing your book. There's this great docuseries out. I mean, was it great for you? I mean, you mentioned, what was it like for you to actually have to physically have your husband hit play and watch this?
He's so sweet. He's right over there. He got me, I wrapped myself up in a blanket, and I was like, ooh. I knew I was going to watch it. There was no way I couldn't watch it, but he gave me a notebook and a pen because he knew I'd want to take notes, and he sat with me the whole time, and we didn't watch the whole thing in one night. That would have been too much, but overload. It was strange, and I write about that in the book, especially because on the footage of all these Westerners, all these people, especially people with dark hair like my mom, I was just sort of scanning the entire frame, looking to see if I saw her. And because everyone's wearing colors of the sunset and most people are very light-skinned, it was easy to think I could have seen her. And I remember wanting to see her on the footage, to see what she was like on the ranch at that time, and also not wanting to see her at all. And it was scary. I mean, I was bracing myself the whole time.
You ultimately never ended up seeing any footage of your mom, but what were you hoping, what were you looking for, if you did see her? Was there something that you wanted? Was it going to give you some peace to see her there?
It's such a good question, because did I want to see her dancing? Did I want to see her meditating? Probably not. No, I guess I probably didn't want to see her. And, to answer the first part of your question, which I forgot about, is I did get messages from people telling me I should watch this, and it was kind of eerie to get the messages before I had seen it. And now that the book has come out and people who are writers know about it, they're writing to me now and saying, oh my gosh, I knew someone who followed him. Oh my gosh, we had this person who came into my health food store who followed him, or, my aunt followed him. So it's really interesting how people have a lot of reference points for Bhagwan, and you can't hide the history.
Well, I don't think the Bhagwan's going to go away, right? Because I think both you and I heard that Barry Levinson is going to be creating a major motion movie picture about Ma Anand Sheela with Priyanka Chopra playing the title character. What do you hope that this feature film might do that maybe the docuseries or this other documentary on Ma Anand Sheela hasn't accomplished?
Such a good question, because it is true. And I do want to say, I understand that this is a great story. I mean, wow, we've got coercion, we've got sex, we've got really interesting Westerners behaving strangely, we've got, tax evasion and immigration, we have the whole thing. And we've got a powerful woman who is kind of controlling Bhagwan, and it's really alluring, and she was beautiful. And but what would be so amazing and not heavy-handed at all, if I can add this note, Barry Levinson, is to perhaps have a child in the background of one of the scenes kind of walk off with an older man, and somehow let that be clear that that was considered okay. Or if we could see maybe a kid walking around without pants or freezing in the, I realize that's my own lens, but it would be nice to have, with the villainous Sheela, with Ma Anand Sheela and the intrigue around her, some actual nuts and bolts of what life was like there.
Yeah. Well, for people who don't know that much about the Bhagwan, he was also known as the sex guru, right?
I can't believe you said that.
So when you're talking about the child walking off with an older man, there's a lot in that, when you say that. Can you speak to some of the things that you've been hearing from the people that reached out to you about how kids were sexualized in Antelope, Oregon?
Yeah, so I don't have specifics to share with that, but I can tell you that I was fully practically this age, which I would have to say if I want to tell you how old I am, but I was like in my late 30s to 40s when I heard he was a sex guru, which I was like, what? Like, I did not know. I mean, this is what I mean. I went through all these decades thinking I understood what Bhagwan was, and then I found out later that he was a sex guru, and that kind of changed a lot in my perspective. That just changed everything. And it also made me feel like, for my father, who knew his ex-wife was over there on the ashram, what that must have been like for him. And, you know, I do know from the woman who was on my podcast today that she did witness a lot of activity going on in the house, and the kids there, the young kids who are prepubescent or just hitting puberty, were sexualized. And in the UK, at the Rajneesh home, they did kind of talk about sex, and they were acting out sexually, and she was sort of intrigued by it. So it was there, it was everywhere around you, and if you were a kid, there's no way you could have held on to any boundaries.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, your mom did come back, you know, from Pune, India, and spent some time with you all, but she went back to the guru when you were about 12 years old, to the community that they had built in Oregon.
Yeah.
And by that time, you kind of knew what was going on. You're no longer 6 years old, but you sort of had this interesting way of trying to pass off that your mom had gone to, you know, to a guru as a way to gain street creds with your peers at school. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So, you know, the book it's got, you know, it's not all sad and it's not all funny. It's hopefully a mush, like a mix of all that. But I definitely, as a kid, had some armor on. I definitely had that tougher sort of I'm fine exterior. So it's a luxury to go back from a safe place in adulthood, from a safe and good life with my family, and explore these days and years when I wasn't that confident or secure or happy. It's luxurious and it's sad, but I'm grateful for what I have now. But back then, I was a little offhanded about the whole thing. And in summer camp, for example, when the girls didn't know me and I didn't have the fancy clothes that they had, and I had just gotten to the summer camp because my dad could afford it, and I was just like, okay, here I am in this no-frills camp, I'd just be like, oh yeah, well my mom is, you know, off, you know, following a guru in Oregon. And they were like, what? So you immediately get sort of the like record scratch, like, really? Tell us about that. So if you don't have the popular friends and you don't have the history with the other girls and you don't have the money and you have a story, at least you can use that story to sort of draw attention to yourself or make yourself seem somewhat special.
Yeah. So that was working really great until a camp counselor really burst your bubble. Somebody at your camp decided that all the kids should learn about the dangers of cults. So I wanted you to read that passage.
Okay, so I'm just going to preface this by saying I was 12 years old, and it was a 6-week sleepaway camp. Not everyone does sleepaway camp, but a lot of Jews do. So we did 6-week sleepaway, and that's where we were when a cult educator came to talk to all of the kids about the dangers of cults. And I did not know that that is what he was going to be talking about. So here is that little section. Okay, this is him talking. Whether a cult leader is living or dead, he said, cult members show them absolute devotion. The cult leader's thoughts, opinions, and belief system are considered absolute truth. Another sign is if the group separates itself from the rest of the world. This can mean in the way they think and behave, but most of the time the group will actually be separate from the rest of the world physically. As I listened, I began to feel a kind of heat spread across the right side of my head. The roots of my hair tingled, like feathers were tickling my scalp. I felt lightheaded, as if a part of me had drifted away. Most cults ask their followers to cut out contact with their family and friends. Friends and family members might notice, he went on, that they never seem to see their loved one anymore, because being in a cult means their contact with outsiders is extremely minimal. It could even be as drastic as choosing to live among members. I listened along with the other kids, but felt as if I had cartoon arrows pointing at my head, and everyone was staring at me. When he asked if anyone had questions, I didn't raise my hand, but when the talk was over, my cabin mates pushed me forward before the counselors took them to their next activities. I don't remember how they knew about my mother, when exactly I had told them about her that summer, but I'm sure I turned it into an off-the-cuff remark in an effort to seem worldlier than others. They might have expensive United Colors of Benetton t-shirts and matching socks, but I knew I had them beat in the interesting life department. Nava's counselor had brought her to me, and we stood with the man next to the fence. "I hear your mother is on a commune," he said, his brown eyes searching our faces. "She's in Oregon with Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh," I told him in the casual way I had perfected, still undecided about what direction to take while talking to this man. Should I play the girl who was unflappable and fine, or the one whose mother had left her yet again? "What do you know about Bhagwan?" he asked in a kind voice. "His followers have to wear sunset colors and a beaded necklace with his face on it," I said, rolling my eyes like it was all so dopey. "She followed him to India too, but we live with our father." "She went to Oregon last month," Nava said. "That's serious," he said. "Rajneesh Puram, what Bhagwan is leading, is a cult." I wanted to hold up a shield to protect us, to fling what he was saying off us. I didn't need this information. I didn't want it. Nava started crying. I felt tears, but I willed them not to drop. I don't know, I'm not sure, I said, backing away from him a bit. It absolutely is a dangerous cult. He tried to talk with us a little more, but soon our counselors came and took us to rejoin our groups. "It's okay," I told Nava, wiping her cheeks. She nodded at me, but her face was red.
So, your dad did a really good job trying to protect you from what was really going on, but the relationship between you and your dad was really rocky. Do you think how he was trying to protect you from what was going on ultimately impacted how he was parenting you and Nava?
That's a good question. I think that's probably, they're all good questions. I'm sorry. I think it speaks to perhaps the generational way of raising kids back then. It also maybe speaks to the way my father was raising us, but we didn't talk about, I don't recall, and my family members can chime in and like put notes or comments or questions in the feed if they have the other answers, but I don't recall us saying, "How are you feeling? How's it going? I get sad too. It would be really hard to not have your mom here." That just didn't, and I don't blame them. I think that was just the way we were raising kids back then. People were being raised. So him not telling us about our mom was probably an effort to protect us and to not scare us more. And he told us that he was super afraid because there was only one road leading to Rajneesh Puram, and there was this arsenal of weapons, and there had been some poisoning and bioterror. Like, he was afraid something really weird was going to happen on the ashram, and he just didn't want to frighten us. So I think it was his effort at self-protection, protecting us. And I still think that it would have been good to sort of have a conversation and a dialogue with us, but we just kind of just went on, we rolled on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there was such a lack of security for you, right? I mean, you didn't know if your mom was going to come back. Your dad was trying to rebuild his life. He was trying to embark on some of his own romantic relationships. And through all this, you're trying to find some sort of community. You're measuring your self-worth against adults and their actions that you have no control over. So how did that impact how you were feeling about yourself, and how did that ultimately impact how you parent your own kids?
I think that I try to communicate with my kids a lot, and I try to explain how, what feelings are going on. But most importantly, I think I put boundaries in place, and I try really hard not to let them be the parent of me, because I think I come from a long line of parents who may not have known how to protect their kids or keep them the kid. And I know it's not always possible. I know children have to help out in the home. I know sometimes when there's not enough support for a parent, the older kid or some of the kids have to step up. And I mean emotional reliance. I cooked and I cleaned a bit and I did laundry and I helped my sister. That's one thing. But I really hope that parents know not to lean too hard on their children for emotional support or comfort, or to partner them, or to parentify them. I think that's the official word for that. That really left a long mark on me, like that really changed the way I was able to have relationships myself, because I was either, and again, nature, nurture, who knows, but I was either chasing after people who didn't want to be there, like one of my parents, or I was running away from another running away like the other parent because I wasn't getting enough space. And I didn't have a lot of relationships. We had a lot of divorce in my family. We didn't have close family friends that had a good marriage. We didn't have mentors. I had a teacher I loved who I write about, but there weren't any other real like prototypes to watch except for maybe one couple.
You have, when I first got to know you, I remember going to your house for dinner, and, your mom and your dad are there, and you've built this amazing life with your family that maybe you didn't have as a kid. But it took you a really long time to kind of find your center and to, start your healing journey. Like, did you start to feel some sort of healing as you spent the years writing this memoir?
Did you ask if I was reading the question? I'm sorry. Did you say? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Like, did you start feeling like? Did you start to feel like you were getting some sort of healing in the process? So
definitely.
What was that like?
I'm sorry. That was so unprofessional of me. Yes. I did. I definitely did. And the thing about my parents is that what's so wonderful is that we talk to each other a lot, and my relationship with my mom has changed so much. I feel like I started to show up more, here's a word that's used a lot, but it's really appropriate, authentically. I think once I did some really heavy work in my own, psyche and what I had to deal with, I was able to really show up in a more honest way with my mom and stop, and she started to as well. And so our relationship got closer and closer. And my father has always been part of the lives of my life and my kids' lives. And so we just sort of do this Shabbat thing and we get together. I mean, they're there in our lives at the same time a lot of the time. And so, I mean, I don't know how they feel about it. It might be kind of hard to be with your ex all the time, but I do think there is some nurturing there, and it's really lovely to see them with my kids and to know that my kids have these grandparents who love them so much and who they know would do anything for them. Like I didn't even have grandparents in my life like that. So to me, that's like a balm.
So, what was it like for you to tell your parents that you were going to write this memoir?
Well, so I didn't tell them until I had a book deal, because why do something like that unless you know for sure that there's going to be, something to read? So I was writing it, and I kind of told my mom, I switched to memoir. Like I went from fiction to memoir, and I think I saw the panic in her eyes. Like as soon as I went to memoir, I think they were both like, great. And so I didn't show them the manuscript until I had a deal with Motina Books and my publisher. And I then showed them the manuscript. I showed my sister the manuscript. I showed my dad and my mom. And I just kind of like braced myself, because for me, and every memoirist is different. I've just written an article about this actually, which you can find. But you don't have to show the people your memoir concerns the manuscript if you don't want to. There's a lot of reasons for and a lot of reasons against. But my parents and my sister are in my life, and I never wanted to throw anyone under the bus. I never wanted to point fingers. I never wanted to write some sob story about how bad things were. I wanted to write the story of what happened to me using words and perspective I didn't fully have when it was happening, to take the power back and make it a story that I could digest and then show to other people so that they can see that no matter what happens to you, you really can find your way, that there is hope and there is a chance for resilience and even maybe reconciliation.
Well, before we go further, there's some questions from the audience. So I wanted to ask you the first question, which is, have you been to the Oregon compound?
No, I have not, but I do think it's a church camp now. I won't say the name because I don't remember it, but it's a Christian camp, or it has recently been a Christian summer camp, which is kind of ironic that the commune that was built, this giant compound that was built by Bhagwan Shree Rajneesh, is now a Christian summer camp. So I'll let you sit on that for a moment. And do you want me to answer that other one or no?
Yes, there is another question that says, did your mom watch Wild Wild Country, and did she think it was authentic?
She began watching some of it, but she could not continue. She did not want to continue. And I'm not even sure if my sister finished it either. I'm not sure. She did not remember things that way. When she got to Pune, India, she felt like those practices that had been depicted were gone, those group therapies that were violent and stuff like that. And when she went to Antelope, Oregon, she felt that she didn't know any of this stuff that was going on because she wasn't in the inner circle.
Do you think that you want to go to that compound someday and just check it out?
That's it. I'm not sure. I've never been driven to do that, but what I have done is gone back to the kibbutz in Israel, kibbutz Lahav, with my family, with my husband and my 2 children. And they and I went there a couple of summers ago, and we were able to look at the area where we lived and see the swimming pool I used to swim in with my father, and it was really, it was quite something. And I also was able to go back to Queens. So here's an interesting part of the story that I found in writing it. For years, I didn't want to really think about the time I spent in Flushing, Queens with my dad and my sister, because those were the waiting years and the waiting for something to change years, and a time when I felt like I was in an in-between. I didn't consider Flushing, Queens my home. But when I went back years ago, before I started writing the memoir, I brought the kids, they were really small, and my husband, and we took pictures in front of my old apartment building. We went to my old school. They even gave me stickers that said PS20 that I could take home. We went to the old cold cut store, like at the sandwich shop, and it was so healing to go back there as an adult and see where I had lived and not be ashamed of it and not hate the memory of it.
Well, we have another question from the audience. When writing your memoir, how did you choose what to put in the book and what to leave out?
That is a really relevant question for all memoirists and actually for a lot of writers. And that was tough. I definitely had a hard time figuring out how to organize it and what should go. I mean, your life is so long and there's so much that happens. But what I did was take advice from my thesis advisor, which was to write about 8 to 10, or maybe it was 10 to 12 scenes that I felt absolutely needed to be in the book no matter what. They were going to be the cornerstone scenes that would eventually become the foundation for the chapters. And that made it a lot easier. I thought, this has to be here, this has to be here, this has to be. And then you really get to understand what are kind of smaller moments or things that can be a little bit more anecdotal instead of diving deep into the scenes. Those were the scenes that I knew had to be there because they would forward the action, they would tell more about who I was, they would tell more about who people involved in the story were.
What chapter was the hardest for you to write and why?
I would say that writing about the discomfort I felt as I entered adolescence when my mom had left again and I lived with my father and my sister, that was something I hadn't explored very much prior in my essays or even in my short stories. And I wasn't excited about writing that part, and I definitely was not excited about sharing that part at all with my parents. It was not something I wanted to do, but I did it, and I'd be very curious when people read it what they think of that section, because I wonder if it comes across as fully fleshed out or if it feels like you can tell that I didn't want to write it, or it'll be interesting for me to know what people think of that.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for your audience members that are out there, if you have any questions for Ronit, please don't be shy. But, before we get to any other questions, I did want to talk to you about the way you write. For me, when I'm reading your writing, whether it's this book or some of the articles that you've written for other outlets, it's like a screenplay running in my head. It's such a visual way of writing. And was there something that happened in your life that influenced the way you write?
I don't know, because I've never been a different kind of writer. I mean, I've changed as the years have gone by, so I'm different than I was when I first began. But I think as a child of the 80s, I grew up on so much television and so many silly movies, including lots of superhero movies, that I think I probably have sort of a cinematic, maybe I have a reel in my head anyway. Maybe I'm close, I know about the pan out and the zoom in, and I'm just like, this is what that would be like. And also I was an actor for a while, so there might be sort of an ability, I'm not trying to aggrandize myself, but I think I might be able to get a bird's eye view of what a scene looks like from outside and then maybe understand that while I'm going in. I'm not sure. And also details, relying on your craft, which is to add sensory details and to add the visuals and to add any auditory things, whatever comes to mind to make it a fully formed scene.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you had touched on this briefly before, but when we talk about why do personal stories matter, what is it that you're looking for when you're interviewing people or when you're putting people on the podcast?
I am looking for stories of, so the people that I interview on the podcast are people who have had something happen to them, who had a certain experience, something pivotal happened, and then they changed. And the podcast is called And Then Everything Changed. And actually, it was based, the beginning of my podcast idea was because of my experience writing fiction and understanding what should be in a story, which is that why is this day different? Why is it worth telling this story right now? I mean, anyone can tell a story about, I went to the store and I bought some of this, and then I bought some of this, and then I went home. But that is not a story of something special or different or important or dramatic that happened that day. So when I am writing, I'm trying to figure out what's the purpose of this scene? Why does this belong here? Does it earn its place? And similarly, all of us have had hard experiences in our lives. And if you ask someone to tell you a sad story or a difficult story, they will have one for you. The reason why I center my podcast on the pivotal moments or the moments that changed people's lives is because I feel that I have come to a place in my own life where I changed emotionally from what I used to be. I used to be more of a New Yorker. I used to be a little more fast-paced. I used to be a little more edgy. And slowly over time, doing the work, being a mom, looking at myself hard and trying to figure out, why do I keep doing these patterns? And it's an ongoing process. I've changed, and my life got so much better because of it, not because of a guru. And so I feel like if people can tell those stories about what happened to them, what they decided to do to make a difference in their life, and how they're living now, that can help inspire other people about these pivotal moments, and that it's never too late, and that we all have resilience. And yes, hard things happen to us all the time, but we can survive and we can be okay.
We have another audience question. Speaking of surviving and being okay, is there a story that you wanted to put in your book but you didn't, and what was that?
Okay, let me think. I know I have these because I thought about it recently. I thought, why didn't I put that in there? But now it's slipping from my mind. Let me just figure it out. There were some lesser stories, like smaller things that ended up being more like a vignette. Or, for example, I'll answer generally and see if the one example comes up. Sometimes, for example, there might have been a story that I thought was kind of interesting or good, but then I'd say, I already kind of told that story. Different circumstances, but the end result of my feeling or what happened between my family or the people in the scene was the same. So why do I need to do it again? Of course you want to build momentum and try to make a point, but I don't need another scene with a babysitter if the same thing happened. I covered a lot of things. Oh, I will say this to answer that question. What was hard for me was to figure out when to end the book, because so many other things happened after the time that I covered. But for me, the framing, the container of this book was after my mom left the second time. And I knew that there are many more years after that, teenage years and adult years, where things have happened to me. But the stories for the time after, don't belong in there right now. Maybe that will be for another book.
So I had another question for you, which is, what inspires you to write?
I think when I have something I need to express that I really feel I want to share, and it might be that I need to get it out and figure out what I'm thinking about and what it is what do I think, and what do I think about what I think. But then sometimes it's like, does anybody else feel this way? Does anyone else, does this bother anybody else? Let's talk about this, and let me put it out there and see if anyone else gets this. And then if someone does get it, you feel as a writer, at least I do, seen and understood and less alone. And I feel like I had this hunch and I followed it, and it landed somewhere. And for me, that's sort of like an affirmation. It's sort of like a confirmation that I'm on the right track and that maybe I matter. I mean, maybe it's an endless search for mattering.
Mm-hmm. For people who read your book, there's so many different ways that you can approach it. So if a mom were to read the book, what would you want a mom to get out of it?
I think what I want all people to get out of it. Maybe one of the most important things, whether they're a parent or a kid or someone who doesn't know if they'll have children, a teacher even maybe, is that our actions are really they really have a ripple effect, especially on children. I mean, I'm really child-centered. I am a teacher when it's not COVID, and I really see the vulnerability in children, and I feel like they're watching and they're learning and they're observing and they see so much. And I would want anyone who reads the book to understand that their kids probably know a lot more about what's going on than they think they do, and communication is really important. And while we don't need to bubble wrap our kids, we certainly shouldn't do that. I know I should do that less myself with my kids. We should definitely be aware that they're taking in what we do and they're absorbing our patterns. And so when you have kids, it's really important to remember that your life completely affects them.
You know, if you could travel back in time, what would your adult self say to your 6-year-old Ronit?
Oh, 6. That's a long time. I'd say, oh my gosh, that's really sad, because I'd be like, you have no idea how bad things are about to get. They're gonna get so bad. But if I could go back to teenage me, I'd say, hang in there, you're going to be okay. That tiny part of you that thinks you might be okay is right. You're gonna be okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ronit. So I want to encourage everybody to go buy her book when she comes back. I promise you will laugh, cry, and all the other emotions in between, but I think there's something for everyone in here about relationships and resilience and healing, and it's just a lovely, lovely book. And folks, please go to Town Hall's partner bookstore, Third Place Books, because they have this book, and you can buy it off their website tonight. And yeah, thank you so much, Ronit.
Thank you, Alice. This was really nice.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you.